Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this training session on finance. My name is Peter Juby and I am a senior SAP Business One consultant with MicroChannel. This morning we're going to go through quite a few various aspects of the finance module. And the first thing we're going to look at is the chart of accounts. So let's jump into our demo system and open up the chart of accounts. And the first thing you'll notice on the latest version is that SAP have added an additional drill down or a filter on the top of the chart of accounts. So what I'm going to do is select something in the list and try and set the filter to level 2, and I should get an error that says a level 4 account has been selected, so that's going to block me from being able to view it at level 2. So let's go into a level 2 account, set that to level 2, and now my focus has been set to level 2. That's how I can keep going through the various levels. Now this is quite handy when you're creating your chart of accounts, or if you just want to go through and look at the structure and do some sort of a collapse, expand sort of function. So I'm going to set this back to level 5, and most of us should have up to 5 levels. The level 6 to 10 was only added in a previous version, so many people who've been on SAP for quite a few years will only have up to level 5. But what I do notice is most of my GL accounts seem to be on level 5, but up here I've noticed 2 accounts that are sitting on an incorrect level. Now this does happen from time to time. It could be a mistake, but just for information purposes, there is nothing wrong with having GL accounts on multiple levels. SAP does support it, and you might have a valid reason for doing so. In this instance, it happens to be a mistake, and I'd like to rectify that. So what I'm going to do is just simply add another level, set it as a title, and I'll just use the next available number. And I'm not sure what to call this section, so I'm going to just use the same name as the section above it. Add that in. Now what I cannot do in the chart of accounts itself is move things around. I can view things, I can look at balances, I can do some settings, but I cannot determine the structure other than adding. To do that, we need to go into the edit chart of accounts function. Now the edit chart of accounts function will list all your main drawers or your level 1 accounts that you can select. In this instance, I'm going to select only assets because I want to move an account within the assets drawer. If I was moving something from one group to another group, I would select the other one as well. So in this case, I'm just going to select assets. I'm going to go down to my account that's in the wrong place, and I'm just going to change its level to level 5. And then simply choose the correct drawer where you want to place it and update to put it in the right place. As simple as that. Going to close out of all of that. The next thing we're going to have a look at is dimensions. Now, SAP Business One allows you to have up to 5 dimensions defined within the cost centers itself. So in our cost accounting settings, we have multi-dimensions switched on, which means we have 5 dimensions. So if we go down to our structure and open up the dimensions, you'll see I have added 5 of them and given each dimension a name. But what I have also done is selected to have each of those in a separate column. So for example, if we go to journal entry, what we're going to see is each one of those 5 cost centers displayed in separate columns. And there they are, all 5 of them. Now, if I wanted to work with those in one column, I could turn that option on. So I'm just going to do that and update. And it closes everything to prepare the forms and to make sure that there are no open forms that will be affected by this change. So SAP will always close everything out. And now we should have just one column called distribution rule. So what that tells me straight away is I'm not using the multi-columns. And if we now go to the distribution rule, there's the 5 distributions, and I can go and select a rule within each one of those. So let's go ahead and fill it out, and you'll see how that displays. And let's get that one over there. I'll just use some generic names. This is a test database. If I click on update, what you're going to notice is all 5 of our cost centers, our dimensions, have been added into the distribution rule, separated by semicolons. So if you're more comfortable with this approach, you can let your users just simply go in and type them in one by one. The other method is a little bit easier, I suppose, when you don't want to do it all in one column. We'll just switch that back on again. And once again, SAP will close all the forms and reopen. And now we're back to our individual columns, where we choose the individual values in each column. Just worth noting, if you are using the data transfer workbench or the DI API or any other method of importing from outside of the system, regardless of that setting, you would use 5 individual columns for your imports. Okay, so this only affects the SAP Business One front end. The next thing we're going to look at is the fact that we might have users who go ahead and just create an entry and don't bother filling the values in. So I'm going to add a journal entry, and you'll notice that it adds without any warning, and I did not select any of my cost centers. So how do we remedy this? Well, let's go and turn our settings on, and under distribution rule, for each one of our dimensions we can select which ones are mandatory and absolutely have to be selected whenever a profit and loss account has a GL posting or financial entry against it. So I'm going to turn that on. Now let's go back to our journal entry and see if it works now. Hopefully it's going to warn us. So we'll just try and do the same entry again. And we're not going to fill any of our cost centers in. And like that, one too many zeros, there we go. And click on add, and straight away we get a warning that says it has to be filled. Now it is worth noting that when you change your settings, it is important to just go back to your chart of accounts and make sure that you have also selected the relevant dimensions for each GL account. So if you do play around with settings and you have unselected, then the accounts that are not ticked here will not warn. They will not expect a cost center to be filled in. The next thing we're going to look at is journal entries and journal vouchers. Now we've already posted 1 or 2 journal entries having a look at the dimensions, but what I want to focus on now is some of the settings around journal entries. Now if I just go back to the previous entries we've been adding, you'll notice that I haven't been filling in the remarks or the references at all. And very often this becomes problematic for accountants and auditors when they have no idea why you posted an entry. Now the standard SAP system allows you to post without the remarks being forced. If we go to our form settings, there are some settings that you can set every time you do a journal entry, but that's not really going to help us. What we want to do is have some permanent settings in place that will block users from making mistakes. So I'm going to go into document settings, choose the second tab, our per document settings, choose the relevant document, in this case our journal entry. We can do the same for vouchers as well, and then we can go and tick specific functions that we want to block to prevent users from making mistakes. And one of those is the remarks. Now you have the option of setting it for only the header, which means the rows do not have to have remarks. In this instance, I want to set rows and headers and force the users to always have both filled in. I don't want to warn, I want to block it, so it now becomes mandatory. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. So let's go and add another journal entry. and try and do the same thing without filling our remarks field in. And when we click on add, we should get a warning at the bottom, the remarks in the header are required. So we'll go and fill that in. Update the remarks in rows as well. In this case I want to say yes because my setting is going to block on both header and rows. So click on yes, and the same remarks have been copied to my rows. So if I go to any of my rows, the remarks is the same, and now I should be able to add. No, I'm still not happy because I haven't selected my cost centers, so we'll go and fill that in. And this time round we should have a successful journal entry added. Next thing we're going to have a look at quickly is the vouchers. Now the vouchers are exactly the same as journal entries in most respects, but the journal voucher can, I suppose, be seen as a parked document or a way of creating a journal without committing it into the database. And so it's quite useful to use. Very often when we do journal entry imports, we prefer to import them as journal vouchers. That gives us the opportunity to go through those journal entries inside SAP as a voucher and check them before we release them and commit them into the database as actual journal entries. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new journal entry voucher, and we're going to put some information in, and I'm not going to balance this entry, so only going to do a one-legged entry. Now obviously SAP would not allow you to post an unbalanced transaction under ordinary circumstances, but in this instance, because it's only a journal entry voucher, I can tell the system to allow it and to continue. Now this is quite useful when you're busy entering a large journal entry and you get to a point where you're not sure of a specific line and you want to maybe call the accountant or go and see somebody about it and query it first and then come back later and continue once you have your answer. So I'm going to say continue, and if we close that, I now have a voucher that's been added, but it does not balance yet. So if I wanted to post that, it is going to give me an error, unbalanced transaction at the bottom. So what I can do is go back into that entry, go and add the missing line, and of course I'd need to also fill in my cost centers. Now if we click on update, we have a balanced transaction, and if we now select it, we should be able to post as a permanent entry. And there we go, clears it out of the table, indicating that it's now been added as an actual journal entry. The next thing we're going to have a look at is the journal entry import. Now this was only added a few versions ago, so it's still relatively new, and I think quite a few people are not aware of the fact that it's there. But if we go to our data import and import from Excel, this used to only have a BP and item option before, so you could import a business partner or an item. SAP have added a few other features, and one of them of course is the journal entry. So I've prepared a file already with the correct data that I want to import, and I'm just going to go and select the template. So that's the template that I want to use, and it's going to populate the mapping for me. Now this mapping is columns A to V from an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm just going to open up the Excel spreadsheet for a moment. So in column A we have an H or an L for header or line, and then we have series. Now in this instance I don't have a specific journal number range that I want to use, so I've left the series blank and it will use the default. I've then got my dates and a whole bunch of fields that refer to the header, and then I've added a few columns specific to the line function, and one of those is our distribution rule and costing codes. So this very first one is our dimension 1, that's dimension 2, 3, 4, and 5. And as I mentioned earlier, when you're importing, you need to have it in separate columns regardless of what your business 1 setting is. So the next thing we're going to do is just go and select our file. Now it will not post if I have the file open. I'll actually get an error, and I don't want to have an error while I'm doing this presentation, so I'm going to go and just close that file so that I don't end up crashing SAP. So enter my file, click on import, and there were no entries brought in, so I have an error somewhere in my file. So we'll just go back to our file, have a look if we've done anything wrong. Hopefully I've got everything correct. Does seem to all be correct. We'll give it one more try. If it doesn't work, I apologize, but it should work. Give it one more try. Okay, it was successful earlier. I apologize for that. But if you do want more information on the structure and how to set this up, use the Business One help context help function, and that will give you more information on the structure of the file. Most important thing is do not have headings in the file, and save it as a tab delimited text file, and it should work. Okay. Next thing we're going to have a look at is our recurring postings. A nice function that very often is overlooked and not used, and it can help you out of some tricky situations where you need to have entries automatically posted on a monthly basis, for example. And if we have a look at the frequency at the bottom, these can be daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, etc. So typically for month ends, you might need to raise some provisions, especially where you have timing differences, invoices coming late from suppliers, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to add one, and we're just going to call this provision. And we'll just call it provision for electricity. We can give it a reference. Another handy little feature is the transaction code, and I'm going to add an extra one. And once we've added the recurring posting, I'll actually show you how the transaction code can help you to find things quite easily. So I'm just going to add one called provisions, and in our settings, we'll give it a value. In fact, let's use a different value this time. And once again, bear in mind that if you do have cost centers, these also need to be completed. Okay. Also, in my instance, I have multi-branches enabled, so I'm just going to also turn that on. I'm going to choose the last day of the month. Very nice little feature at the bottom, valid until now. This is useful where you only want this to post within the current financial year, for example. So we're going to set this till 30 June 2019. And what will happen is at the end of the year, obviously this will become inactive. We can then go into it and make some changes, give it new values, etc., and then just set it up again to start in the new year. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add that. At the bottom is a little confirmation list. Now you can open this up from a few different places. It usually, depending on your settings, will pop up when you log on in the mornings. If there's anything for the day that needs to be posted, it will pop up. And this can be set at a company level, so inside of our general settings, under services, we can say display those recurring postings when we log in on. We can also do it at a user level. My apologies, the wrong place there. And set up general users, and under the users we can choose per user who will get certain alerts. Next thing we're going to have a look at is budgeting. Now, SAP allows for more than one budget, and very often people aren't aware of this. So we're going to go into our budget scenario. I've already added a budget called main, and by default every financial year will always have a main budget. So this is the one that will get used for check-in if you have check-in turned on. So what am I on about? Let's go and have a look at our settings. Under general settings for our budget, if we have turned the budget on, so you initialize it by ticking, we can then decide if we want to have warnings or block-ins if we deviate from the budget. And this can be done against the annual or the monthly budget against certain transaction types. Okay, so I've configured mine to do some warnings if budgets have been exceeded. Once it's been initialized, the budgets are only against profit and loss accounts. So if you want a budget against a balance sheet account, you can go in and set it up to be included, so you can do balance sheet budget as well. Unfortunately, this is manual unless you use DTW to do some bulk updates, but you'd need to go through each balance sheet account and tick it if you want to have a balance sheet budget as well. I'm not going to save that change. So we have our main budget, but what I'd like to do is add another two, and I'd want a negative and a positive, or an optimistic and a pessimistic budget. So there's two ways of doing it. One way of doing it is using the copy function, and yeah, you could, for example, use a previous year's budget or actual values from a previous year. I'm not going to use that method. I'm going to use the add row method, and so I'm going to add first of all a pessimistic, and hope I get it spelled correctly. And I'm going to base it on my main budget at 90%. So I'm expecting on that budget to be 10% down. And let's add another one and call it optimistic. And we'll base that also on the main budget, and we'll put that at 10% up. And now we have three budgets for our current financial year. Now to set those budgets, we're going to go into our budget functionality, and you'll see we have our three. Your main budgets are always in red, so they stick out like a sore thumb, and you can see there's our main budget. And we haven't set anything yet, so let's go into the main budget, and then we can see the impact on our optimistic and pessimistic. Now, when you open your budget the first time, if you get a blank screen, do not panic. Just hit the little tick box in the top left and choose to display accounts with no budget. That's quite handy if it's unticked and you've only got certain accounts filled in, then you don't end up seeing the entire listing of every single GL account, where some of them might not be relevant to budget. Okay, in this instance we want everything displayed, and what we're going to do is put a value in for our sales, and we'll put a nice big amount in there. And we can just adjust the column width so we can see it a bit better. Another handy little feature, if for example you want your cost of sales to be linked to that value, we can set our sales account as our parent and put a percentage in. Now for some reason he doesn't seem to like that, but it's probably because I still haven't updated and given him a value. Let's go ahead and update, and we'll just say yes to all, and then hopefully there we go, we can now choose our account, and I'm going to say minus 65%, and the reason for that is I have a GP, for example, of 35%, so I want the cost to be 65% of that. Now the negative is because I'm moving from a credit value on my revenue to a debit as an expense. Okay. Right, so let's go ahead and update that. We're going to come back to this again and look at a few other features, but I just want to go out of there and have a look at our optimistic, which we added 10% to, and you'll see the 10 million became 11, and our 6.5 became 7.15 million. And let's have a look at our pessimistic. We have a look at that, 10% down, so 10 million less 10% gives us 9 million, and the same on our cost of sales side. Okay. So you can have multiple budget scenarios, and each one of them can be based on one of the others at a ratio. Let's go back into our main budget for a second. The other thing I want to show you this morning is the method or distribution method. So on our modules, you might have noticed under budget setup is something called a budget distribution method. So that's this column over here, and at the moment it's set to equal. Now there are two others that SAP ship standard with the system, which is the ascending or descending. There's a define new where you can add your own, and there's manual. So if we go into manual, what we're doing is we're telling the system that we want to assign a value to each month on our own. So we don't want to split 10 million by 12. So I could go in and say this month's going to be 800, and let's set this one to 750, and this will give us a bit of a trend, and that one's going to be 800 again, and so on. And what you're going to notice is at the bottom it's going to try and balance it for you, and it will tell you how much you're out by. So I'm just going to copy that same value just to go a bit quicker into every month. And if I blank that one out, it will tell me how much I'm short. And I'm just going to put the balance into the final month. So as long as it all adds up to the total, the system's going to take the total divided by the 12 months by the value in each month and come up with a percentage. And that's the percentage that it's going to apply. Okay. So we could also define new, and we could have given those same factors over here and use that. So for example, a good example is sales history for it. And let's say we want that to tie up to last year's sales, which was 9865 say like that. And then we could go and give each month's actual figure. And by using this, what we're going to do is make the 10 million follow the same trend monthly and divide and show a monthly value based on the same trend that we had in the previous year. Okay, not going to add that now, but that's just a few of the ways of doing that. Even if it's set to equal, you can still double click and view what the monthly spread will be. In this case, because it's equal, each month will be exactly the same value. Obviously, due to rounding differences, the final month might be a few cents up or down. Let's go out of that. Right, the next thing we're going to look at is the advanced account determination. Also something that was added quite a few versions back, and something that many users are possibly not aware of. So let's go into our setup financials and have a look at what it's all about. Now, in this instance, I don't have it turned on, and the reason I know it's not turned on is there's no advanced button showing at the bottom. And if I just go into my settings for a second, under my company details, all the way down the bottom is a tick box, enable advanced GL account determination. Now I don't want to switch it on for this database, so I'm going to switch to another one that already has the tick box set. So if you go in there, enable advanced has already been turned on this database. So let's now go and have a look at what that means. So if we go into, for example, the stock tab, you'll notice the button is there. You'll also notice a little column called Advanced Rules. And this is quite handy because what the system is telling us is that we've already utilized this feature and set up some rules against various GL account aspects. So let's click on the advanced and see what it does differently to our ordinary account determination. Now, of course, the standard account determination in SAP is set by one of three methods, the first being warehouse level, second being item group, and the third being specific item level. And you can have a combination of those inside SAP across various items. But sometimes an item needs to follow a rule that either warehouse or group or item level doesn't cater for. In this instance, the advanced can offer you some extra options. And what we're going to do is, just to explain it, click on our determination criteria, and you'll see that you can select various aspects of the item or fields, such as the business partner, customer or supplier, depending on which marketing document you're on, for example. And you can also select UDFs. So depending on which UDF you're looking for, which table it's from, etc., you can select up to 5 user-defined fields that you want to use to force a specific posting to go to a specific set of GL accounts. So all of your various GL accounts that you would typically set, so yeah, it's going down by row. The only difference here is they're going across by column. Okay. So let's have a look at a code. So R11, for example, is set at the items level, and what we're saying is this specific item code, when it's this warehouse, needs to go to the following GL accounts. Another example, for example, if this item is in this specific item group and it's all the items in that item group need to go to a different stock account, for example. So this is very handy, especially where you want sales, for example, or cost of sales to reflect in various GL accounts, and the standard system doesn't cater for doing the split exactly the way you'd like to do it. Right, and the final two sections we're going to look at today is the exchange rate differences and conversion rate differences. Now, exchange rate differences has got to do with our foreign currency back to our local currency, and conversion rate deals with our parallel currencies. So some of you might have noticed in the system columns marked LC, SC, and FC. So SC is what we call a system currency. So if you were reporting to a head office in a different country, for example, in Britain, and you needed GBP as your secondary currency, then you would set that up as your system currency. And at the end of the financial year, you might need to revalue everything in GBP in order to report to head office. So we'll look first of all at the foreign currency, and just get back into the right database. And under our financials, we have our exchange rate differences and our conversion differences. So if we open up exchange rate, we have the option to revalue only GL accounts or to also revalue our customer and supplier accounts. We can choose a whole bunch of settings. I'm not going to go into too much detail on all the different settings, but you can choose your date ranges, etc. And you can also choose your specific increase and decrease accounts for your forex gains or losses. And then pretty much just execute it. It will execute and post the journal entry based on the execution date, and you can then go and obviously post an opposite entry or reverse that entry out on the first day of the next financial year. But that's not the only option available to us, and there's another option that many might not be aware of, and I'm going to show you that now. So if we go to any of our financial reports, balance sheet, trial balance, or profit and loss, there should be a little button on the right hand side called revaluation. Now, if you want to test your revaluation, or if you want to just simply have a look at what it would be worth based on some forward thinking, some expected upswing or downswing in the market, you could simply come in here and set that fixed rate and run your report. This is not going to post an entry. It's just going to grab your current financial information and apply the rate only for the report itself. Okay. If you choose posting or value date, this will go back off to our exchange rate table, and it will use the exchange rate for the specific dates that you've selected or for the date that you're running the specific revaluation. If you're using any indexes, you can also use your index as a valuation method and just simply run the report to see what the impact of that price index will be on your transactions. So you do not have to post a forex gain loss entry to see what the effect or the impact will be. You can simply run it from your report and get an idea of what's going to happen before you physically post your exchange rate differences in the system. So the conversion, very simple, very similar to our forex exchange rate. All we do is select our correct GL accounts, increase and decrease accounts, and set our date that we want to execute, and then run it. And once again, on the 1st of the next month, we just reverse that journal back out.